Hi, I'm Nick Rains from Leica Camera Australia. This is the Leica SL3-S. What has changed since the previous model? Well, pretty much everything, and with a huge step forward too. So let me just go through those new features and explain to you why I think they're so important. Okay, what has changed? Now, if you think back to the SL2S, it was really good at high ISO. It shot very, very quickly, many frames per second, and it had really good video capabilities, including the ability to shoot externally to RAW for an external recorder. So it was intended to be a much more serious video camera, capable of full production value video, and also a bit of a speed demon. Maybe that's what the S stood for in terms of its ability to shoot. 24 megapixel sensor. This camera, SL3-S, is still 24 megapixels, but that has allowed some significant step forwards in the other capabilities. Because if you think about it, the lower the resolution of the sensor, the quicker the read speed of the information from the sensor. So you have this trade-off between autofocus speed and resolution of the camera. You can't really have both. So the higher the resolution of the sensor, the slower the read speed, and the more difficult it is for the camera to calculate the autofocus. Maintaining 24 megapixels, which most people would agree is a nice sweet spot for resolution versus performance, it allows certain things to have been improved. What are those things? Well, first of all, 30 frames a second shooting. For 180 frames as well. The buffer is about 8 gigabytes, and regardless of whether you've got a CF card, CF Express card, an SD card, or something else which I'll come to later, 180 frames seems to be the limit. Obviously, different cards will remove the data from the buffer much quicker, but 180 frames is plenty. And that works at 30 frames a second with autofocus completely. There's no sort of, I think on the SL3 you were limited to 3 or 5 frames a second. I'd have to check the manual before autofocus stopped working, and you were just repeating the same focus point, which is great for something that's not moving towards you, but not ideal if you're tracking. Well, now this will work at 30 frames a second with full PDAF, and I've got some examples to show you in a sec. So that's the shooting speed and the autofocus improvement. I'll give you a few more details in a sec. Second thing is it now shoots in 6K open gate. So a 24 megapixel sensor, of course, is 6,000 by 4,000 pixels. So open gate gives you a video frame of 6,000 by 4,000 pixels, which is basically 6K. You do have a 6K setting in the 16:9 format, or a C6K if you want it, but you can actually shoot video with the full sensor, which allows you to crop out the bit you want for maximum resolution. If you're ending up at 4K, you've got some extra pixels to play with for creative crops. But what's really cool about that is if you want to shoot vertical video, a lot of social media stuff is shot vertically, and also point of sale video. If you think about it in stores, you often have a vertical monitor. With the sensor being 4,000 pixels high, you can have a full 4K, very close to precisely 4K in a vertical direction as well. Whereas recording in 4K normally, it's only 2,160 pixels high. So you're doubling the resolution in real terms in the vertical sense. So that's quite exciting too. Other thing about video, which is more of a pro thing, is you can record C6K and 6K ProRes in 422 10-bit as well. So for those of you who are interested in video specifications, that is a really high specification, and it will do that up to somewhere around 18 or 1900 megabits per second. Whereas most cameras in the past that Leica have been using to film video have been 400 or 600 megabits per second. I think the Q3 maxes out at 600 megabits per second. This goes up to 2000, not to an SD card, but it will record that to a CF Express card, or, and this is exceedingly cool, you can record to an external SSD drive. I can plug that into the USB-C port. I've got a little adapter here that Small Rig make, which takes these little hard disks, and I can bolt that under the camera, and I can record video. So that's a 1 terabyte drive. So I can record video or stills to that external hard drive for extra capacity. Something else that I was not expecting, and it was a really nice surprise, was the reintroduction, or let's say they've kept the multi-shot mode from the SL2S. The SL3 dropped that because the 60 megapixels was deemed probably quite enough for most people, and it would have had to have been redesigned completely to handle that extra resolution as compared to the SL2, which was 47 megapixels. When I looked into the menus of multi-shot mode, lo and behold, hand holdable. Now that is a big deal. So this camera will record 96 megapixel captures using multi-shot mode handheld. Now there are some caveats to that. First of all, the maximum exposure is 1 second, whether you're hand holding or on a tripod. That's the same as it was before. But as long as you're still shooting in a stable manner, like you would have to anyway with a handheld shot, so with a lower limit of, let's say, a 60th of a second with a 50mm lens like this, and that varies on how stable you are. There's no technical limit to this, but the camera is still looking to see if there is too much vibration for multi-shot mode, and if you're a little bit wobbly, it will actually not capture, it'll fail basically. But I've had a lot of success shooting them in multi-shot mode, 96 megapixel captures, but you just have to be careful, which is fine. I mean, you're getting 96 megapixels of capture. I mean, it's really quite a bonus. So I was very, very pleased to see that. The other thing that's been introduced is another step forward of high ISO. This camera now goes up to 200,000 ISO. And not only is it a big number, but the results are genuinely usable. In the past, some cameras, whoever made them, have had the highest number as being, it's like a marketing thing really, but they weren't that good. They were technically, yeah, that's 100,000, whatever, but you look at it and you go, whoa, that's, really hard to deal with. This straight out of the camera is usable, but when you combine it with some of the much more sophisticated noise reduction technology that we've got externally, so in post, and there are some software packages out there that do an amazing job, the combination of the two is astonishing, and I'll show you a couple of examples in a sec. So what we've got here is essentially the same body as an SL3, but now we've got 200,000 ISO stills and video. We've got 30 frames a second shooting for stills. We've got a hugely improved phase detect autofocus system, and we've got this hand-holdable multi-shot mode. Okay, let's talk about the ISO ability of this camera, or its ability to shoot in basically pitch black. Because when you need to shoot 200,000 ISO, you really can't see in front of you. You need a torch. It's really, really dark. So this picture here is of the bridge of one of the ships I've been working on recently in Norway. I took the camera to Norway with me. At night, the bridge operates under night conditions with a red light, like in a dark room, and it's really dim, so they've got, it doesn't spoil their night vision. This is shot at 25,000 ISO using the lens I've got on the camera here, the 50mm Summicron. And I think you'll agree, this is pretty clean. I've been using Adobe Lightroom's denoise basically since it came out. It's phenomenal. And what I've found is that the higher the ISO, the better it gets, if that makes sense, or obviously the bigger the difference it makes. So a combination of the incredible low light capabilities of this camera with Lightroom denoise is really, really good. Now, you don't have to use Lightroom. There are other software packages out there that do the job arguably just as well. Let's not go down that part, but for me, it fits nicely into my workflow. So anything past about 6,400 or even 3,200, I will often run through denoise, not for everything, but for the special ones. And it will generally add something to the picture at the low ISOs, but it adds a lot at the high ISOs. And you can see how clean it is. Then let's go up the scale a little bit. Let's go up to 100,000. This is by no means the world's best photograph. It's just a picture of a ship in the dock. But this is pre-dawn. You can see that the street lights are on. And it was basically a time of day where you wouldn't even think about getting your camera out unless you took a tripod with you. And then with denoise, you can see how much it cleans it up. You can read the letters on the ship. You can read some of the signs on the building. Really, really good. So that's 100,000 ISO. Next one. Not a very exciting picture. It's just one of the tenders off the ship. But this is 200,000 ISO in basically pitch dark. You can see the navigation lights are on the tender itself. This is without noise reduction, and that is amazing for 200,000. Yes, there's noise. Of course there's noise, but can you just see how tight the noise is and also how sharp the picture is anyway? Then a little bit of magic from Adobe AI denoise and we get this. And this is a completely usable image. I wouldn't have no hesitations about publishing this picture in a book up to double page spread. It is crazy good. Really is. So that's 200,000 ISO. So with this camera, I have absolutely no problems at all using it. Well, basically on any ISO, get a sharp picture regardless of how much light there is. Use whatever ISO you need to use. You know you can control any noise later on. So 12,500, yeah, that's fine. 25,000, that's fine. 50,000, okay, it's starting to get a little bit flatter. You do lose a little bit of contrast with the high ISOs, admittedly, but it's completely usable, so you can get the shot without having to compromise too much of quality, or hardly anything really. So brilliant in terms of high ISO ability. Okay, let's talk about multi-shot mode. 96 megapixel capture, so that's literally double what you would normally get. So your 6,000 by 4,000 pixel image becomes 12,000 by 8,000. They're big files, they will make your computer crawl a little bit, but that's the price you pay for super high resolution. I used the multi-shot mode for this shot from Bergen in Norway. It's the sort of image that really requires really fine detail. So it was a natural thing to turn it on and just see what the results were like. Can't really show you the quality on a video. If you see an AO print off this, you'll go, yeah, okay, I can see that benefit. It really is better than 24 megapixels, clearly. You have to be a little bit careful. You have to be really steady with the shot, just like you would do anyway if you were trying to get the maximum sharpness out of your camera. So hand holding, lower limit, even with the stabilizer, probably a 30th of a second, depends how unstable you are. On a tripod, of course, is no problem at all. But remember that you cannot wobble the camera when you're hand holding it. Otherwise it will shoot, but it will then say failed to create image. Then you've got to try again. So on a tripod, no problem at all, of course. Hand holding it, just be careful, and then it works fine. But previously, we didn't even have the ability to shoot in at handheld mode. So this is a massive step forward in usability. Okay, autofocus. Now this sort of camera really needs good autofocus. When you're shooting at the highest frame rate of 30 frames per second, then the ability to track something moving towards you is of inestimable value. So I don't generally shoot much sport, and when I was in Norway I was rather hoping to do some bird photography. For whatever reason there were virtually no birds around. It was the wrong time of year, so I can't shoot any of that style of picture. Luckily my colleague from Germany, Ollie, who was also testing the camera, shot some cross-country running. So here's a sequence of this lady running straight towards the camera, shooting at the highest frame rate, and I think if I play them to you quickly, you'll see that each one is perfectly sharp. But fundamentally, the improvement in autofocus has been huge. And the reason for that is because whilst we had a resolution of one phase detect line on the sensor per 240 pixels, that's in a vertical direction, now we have a phase detect line every 12 pixels. So it's 20 times the resolution. It's also got almost double the number of focusing points. So the improvement of the autofocus from the SL3-S is off the scale. It is unbelievably good, and it works in video too. So let me just see if I can just demonstrate briefly how good that is. Let me just turn the camera on and I'll hold it so that you can see the screen on the back. There we go. You should be able to see the screen on the back of the camera there. I'm pointing that at my control box in front of me here, and you'll see that it's sharp. Now don't worry about the flashing lights. That's just because the frame rate that I'm filming at is causing some problems with the pulsing of the lights on the box there. To my eye, they look like they're static. That is in autofocus continuous, and you can see that new shape of the zone area. Okay, and within that area, it's detecting continuously for the autofocus. Now watch what happens when I point it at my reference monitor in front of me here. Bang, straight on me. So that's pointing at the monitor showing me, and then back to the control box. That is really quick and beautifully smooth too. It seems to zoom along with the focus and then slow down to a nice finish. It doesn't just sort of snap, which can look a bit artificial. It's a beautifully smooth focus pull. There we go, from the buttons to me. So that's changing from about 2 feet in front of me, from there to about 4 feet in front of me, about there. That, I think, is really, really impressive. So that autofocus is a huge step forward, and it absolutely shows with things like for sport, as you saw in those running pictures. For birds, for fashion, huge step forward. So autofocus, 11 out of 10 in my estimation. There's a couple of other things that have been added. There's a new version of Leica Photos that will come out with the camera when it's released. That has really beefed up the transfer rate from the camera to the device up to 40 megabytes per second. So your raw files will download that much quicker to your device. So that's really neat. There's a couple of other things like a live tethered preview mode. So when you shoot a picture on the camera, it immediately becomes visible on the screen of your device. So if you're in a studio and you want someone to watch what you're shooting, you could use that. It's really quick, really easy to use. The thumb wheel has become customizable like any other function button, so you can use that as a custom button on click. I tend to leave it on the default, which is exposure compensation, but you can make it work for you however you want. And something else which was missed out of the SL3 for all sorts of reasons is the content credentialing. The M11P has that, the M11D has that, the SL3-S will have that. The firmware for that should be released with the camera as this video comes out. I haven't got it yet because I haven't got that firmware version yet, but it should work exactly the same as all the other cameras that have that feature. So just to very quickly explain what that is, there is a hardware chip inside the camera. It's not software, it's hardware, which can digitally sign each image. Now, down the track from after the image has been processed on the computer and published or whatever, that of course, like any metadata, could be stripped out. So the lack of the credentials doesn't tell you anything about the veracity of the picture. But if the content credential digital stamp is present, you know 100% the track record of that picture right the way back to its first capture, because it includes a small thumbnail of the original capture from the camera before anything has been done to it. And then each step of the process of it being post-processed or whatever is recorded in like it's called a manifest. And that means that you can see what's being done to that picture. So if you find an image that has the content credentials attached to it, you can make your own judgment about the veracity of that picture. If it's there, it's impossible to fake it. It cannot be added to the image later. The original camera stamp cannot be created except in this precise camera with this precise chip. So the presence of that stamp gives you a very, very, well, a completely objective view on the provenance of that photograph right the way to the beginning. So for press photographers, news, documentary, forensic possibly as well, you have like an evidence chain right the way through to wherever the picture ends up. So very, very useful, and that will be in the camera from launch date. So what do I think about this camera? Well, when I first got it, I thought, okay, yeah, there's a couple of things changed. But then I started to look deeper and deeper, and I realized that the step forward from the SL2-S is remarkable. The high ISO, the shooting rate, the autofocus, the video capabilities have just been maxed out totally. So where this fits into the Leica range is a tricky one, because I'm using the SL3 a lot. I love the 60 megapixel capture, okay? But given that I can get 96 megapixels out of this with a little bit of care, and the video capability has been improved, and the autofocus capability has been improved, it does make me wonder whether I'd be better off with one of these rather than SL3. What I'll probably do is have one of each. So I will have the 60 megapixel capture for maybe certain types of photography, and then I will have this as the sports camera for wildlife, for long lens, high ISO stuff. But I can use this in both roles, so it's a tricky decision to make. If you're going to have two bodies, I would have one of each, definitely. If you're only going to have one body, Well, I don't know. You'd have to make your own mind up. Depends how important the high ISO and the 30 frames a second shooting is, and also the improved autofocus. I should make the point that the autofocus in the SL3 for stills and for 90% of most of use cases is brilliant. Okay, it's just that this has improved upon it. It really has. So where this fits into your camera bag, entirely up to you. But I was hugely impressed by the improvements of this camera, and I'm sure you will be too.